Good. Well, hello. Welcome along, everybody. It's great to be here for another one of these Fotospeed artist chats. And I'm joined by the very wonderful Rachael Talibart. Hello, Rachael.
Hello. Hello, Sam. How are things? And hello, Tim.
We're all very good. Tim is here with us, like you say, who's our technical wizard. I think he is a wizard. I'm allowed to say that from Fotospeed as well.
I think he is.
We're gonna talk about a kind of wide range of stuff, hopefully today. Mostly Rachael's work and some printing aspects of that as well. And that's why I'm really excited to have her along, because many of you will know Rachael. I'm sure, in fact, everybody watching this will know who Rachael is. Seascape photographer and many other types of photography as well. But the seascapes is her love, and that's been well documented. So I'm not necessarily going to go heavily into that. But I thought it might be nice just for us to kick off a little bit of what you've been up to. It's been such a strange year for everyone, hasn't it? And I know you are someone who works lots out on the coast and obviously doing workshops out on the coast as well as your own image making. So just how's it been the last sort of 6 to 12 months for you to pivot sort of professionally and for your own work as well?
Yeah, so it's actually like a lot of photographers. I found the restrictions on getting out and making my own photos quite difficult. This last lockdown, it did say if it's your job, you could still, and you had to go out to work, you still could. But because I don't actually live on the coast, people always think I live up by a beach, but I don't. I live inside the M25. So, I'm really in sort of a suburb of London. And it just didn't feel entirely, to me, the right thing to do, to be tearing off down to the coast during the lockdown. I know other people have different opinions, and I'm not judging them at all. I'm not into that. But I made the decision that it wasn't the right thing to do. So I felt very limited in the last few months about my own photography. I'm dead keen now to get down there as much as I can. But of course, now I've got all my postponed workshops all rammed in together. So yeah, I still have not got much time for my own photography. But in terms of the workshops, we've done so much online. And in fact, some of the workshops, some of the creative development training that we do, I actually have found it works better online. We used to do it in a classroom, but somehow people, I think they may be more relaxed when they're in their own homes. And also they're coming to the workshops better prepared to talk about their work. They've prepared presentations. And it's, in fact, one of those workshops, the one-day creative development, we won't take that back to the classroom. We will keep that online forever. So you find these surprising things, don't you?
Yeah, and I think Tim, I mean, you deal with customers all over the country and all over the world, and that's another thing, isn't it? People can take part from wherever they might be.
Well, I've got a chap next week. He's learning one of my Japanese bookbinding classes, but he's actually lives in Japan. So, so that's quite interesting. Same as you, Rachel. I think we found that actually the printing classes, you think it was a very practical kind of hands-on type of course, but actually online it works quite well because people are using their own computers and their own printers. They're not using all our super duper kind of set up printers in the office in the teaching room. They're using their own printers, so they get to know their own things. Like they learn to come for us for a day in the classroom, and then they go home and it's completely different because they haven't got these latest print or whatever. So
I totally agree about that. We're just in the middle of our second virtual print workshop, and the big feedback from the first was just that. We used to do them, we still do offer the classroom when we're allowed, but I always thought afterwards people go home and now they've got to try and connect to their own printer and stuff happens. But with the online stuff, they're all working with their own gear, exactly that. And there's always something like, the problem with the driver because you've just upgraded to Big Sur, or, there's always a little niggle.
Don't talk to me about that.
So it's been really nice to be able to actually know that at the end of the workshop, those clients are going away already printing confidently.
Yeah, I think that online learning side of it is opened up a lot, and I think that's definitely here to stay. And even doing things like this, I mean, the technology was in place for us to do this beforehand, but I think people watching it now we've got used to this, and it can still be of a high quality. And we're going to get into some of your images in a few minutes and talk through the capturing and some of the print thoughts as well. So bear with us on that, everybody, including some bigger vistas and really small detail, lovely shots as well. But before we do, I know you've had other things going on in the last 12 months because your new book, Tides and Tempests, is out now and has to much fanfare. And there was an almighty, it was everywhere. I couldn't get away from it in a good way. But
I'm
it was
sorry.
it's really great. It's really exciting. So I think I just want to, because obviously the Sirens book had been out a couple of years ago, or maybe 3 now. So what was the kind of, just the concept behind getting the Tides and Tempests together? I know it's a bigger book, 120 plus images, I think. So kind of what was that driving motivation for you and the importance of having that in print format, for years to come?
I think that's another lockdown thing. Seriously, it wouldn't exist if we hadn't had COVID, because I would have been too busy to do it. But it was in the back of my mind to do another book. Sirens, I think there are some seconds going around somewhere on eBay or whatever, but basically it's been sold out for ages. And I was very conscious that people knew me for that one portfolio, but it's by no means the sum of my work. And I've been doing these talks called Tides and Tempests to clubs for ages about the extraordinary breadth the coast offers you. It's not just about one thing. And sometimes people say to me, wow, why do you only do coast? Don't you want some mountains or some woodland? As if coast is a limiting subject. But of course, I mean, you know this, Sam. For sure, you know this. The coast offers so much variety. And I just really like the idea of doing a book that showed a broader slice of the coast, if you like. And I wanted it to be bigger and have higher production values and be a very different product from Sirens.
So I think we're going to obviously talk about the importance of the print in the course of this conversation. And a single print is one thing, and that can come in many sizes, and we're going to talk about that too. But a collation of things into the book, but it's a hellacious thing, isn't it? Because I believe the book was litho printed, which is a thing of itself, and there's some technical things to get your head around. So was the whole kind of prep, without going too deep on technicals, was there a little bit of a learning curve there, or did you feel comfortable in that world? You know what I'm saying, in terms of making sure, because we know, don't we, as artists, we want exactly the look. It has to be right, and the tones, everything. So was there any big sort of jumps to get through there, or did it all go quite smoothly?
Nothing. That's my 3rd book now, and I can tell you nothing ever goes smoothly. Yes, I could make your hair curl with stories. But seriously, you're absolutely right. If it's a litho print and you've got 120 or so pictures, and some of them are black and white, and some of them are color, and some of them have lots of color, and some don't have much at all, and you have to compromise. And there are pictures in that book that don't look like my prints of those pictures. And that's the simple reality of it. And at some point, you just have to accept that. It isn't easy. Not when you love, I know you love it too, you love printing, and you treat each image on its own merits. And then you see compromises. It's really hard as the artist to do that. But I mean, to actually do a significant print run of individually printed giclée prints would just be, I mean, really, really difficult. I can't see it ever making any financial or practical sense. So, you've just got to compromise. But isn't that life, really?
Yeah, well, I think this year's probably taught us all that again, hasn't it? Just actually, final thought on the books, Tim. I just want to loop you in before we get into the images. I mean, Rachel's book is a much bigger production, as she was saying there. And it's really great, I think. We've seen the last few years, haven't we? A real plethora of self-published books or published books with specialist book suppliers like Kozu, who I know Rachel kind of did the Tides and Tempests book with. But I know you mentioned earlier, you do the Japanese handmade books. So it's such a cool thing, isn't it? That it is something even of ourselves we can do with some knowledge in the very small scale, all the way up to something published in a high street store.
I think, and there's a lot of artists that I know in kind of the conceptual side of things and things like that, only would print in a artist made book kind of type of way as well. They wouldn't go for the big mass kind of litho print or something like that. But they don't make any money. But I think it's more, it's kind of it's something else, isn't it? It's probably more of a promotional and things like that kind of thing. But they do an edition of a book as well.
Well,
fascinating. I think it's great that they do this, which I'm kind of in part of, I suppose.
Well, first of all, I didn't know you taught Japanese binding, Tim, and I'm going to have to sign up for that because I want to learn. Yeah, exactly.
We'll do that one together.
I'm doing French binding as well soon as well.
Oh,
so
excellent!
That's lovely, yeah.
But I collect photo books, as I think you probably know, and you just see some of them on the shelf back there. That's by no means all of it. And I have started buying some of these artists' limited edition books. I bought 2 during lockdown. I bought one by Michaela Griffiths, which is just a beautiful thing. And then I bought one by Marianthe Lenas as well. You're spending £200 for a book and with very few pictures in it, but each one has been handmade by the artist, an edition of 5 or 10. And they are exquisite things. They really are. So I consider that was money well spent, actually.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think the work demands sometimes a different format, and we're going to get to that. And actually, Tim, if you don't mind popping the images up, because we're going to talk about some of Rachel's images, and there's a couple of big seascape images, which some of you may have seen, and obviously Rachel had a huge amount of success with those, which Rachel and I have talked about before, can be both good and bad in different ways. And we're going to talk about a couple of them, but also we've got some really delicate, detailed, beautiful shots as well, which I was really keen to talk about because, as Rachel's already said, the sea generally and everything around it gives you a huge amount of stuff to play with. But if we just pick up on this idea of format and size perhaps as well, Rachel, I know you've had some success selling prints all here, there and everywhere, which is great, but especially some really big prints, if I'm correct in saying that. So do you think there are times such as this one maybe where just simply having it bigger is always better?
Yeah, I actually not with this one, I think. So funnily enough, this one, which I sent you, so you didn't pick it. It's quite naughty of me to send it to you, really, because although I made this photograph in February 2016, when I made most of the really well-known sirens on the same day, same storm, same place, I didn't actually find and process and print this picture for the first time until this year. And the reason for that was because sirens, there aren't any landmarks in the pictures. It's just isolated waves, which was really part of the project. And so when I went and reviewed the files from that day in Lightroom over 5 years, I was always looking for isolated waves and just ignoring the pictures with bits of lighthouse and bits of seawall in them, with 1 or 2 very occasional exceptions. I just didn't look at them. And then during this last lockdown, of course, not being able to make new pictures, like everybody, I've been raiding the archives, and I found this picture. And so it's not really part of Sirens. It's a new picture, albeit an old picture. But I suppose the reason I included it when I sent you some pictures is because this is a really good example of why it's not a good idea to be too tidy in Lightroom. Because if I had gone through, and thought, well, here are my sirens, these are the ones I like, I'll delete the rest and clear some space on my hard disk, this picture would have been deleted long ago. And I now really, really like it. This one could be printed really big, but I actually think I've got an A3 plus print of this somewhere in my studio at the moment. And I really like it at that size too, actually. Sometimes the big prints can be a bit overwhelming. But having said that, some of my sirens, the bigger the better, frankly, because it's all about the drama and the big statement.
I think it may also depend where it's going. Well, it always depends where it's going, doesn't it? Yeah. But I think because the actual physical things we're looking at, but there is some ambiguity in that, and we might talk about that too, because we see them generally as very large physical things and dramatic. I think perhaps there's a temptation then to just make them bigger and bigger, like you say, and they do suit that huge thing because it's an impact image, and an impact image might need an impact print. If you know, that's kind of fair to say, hopefully.
Oh yeah.
But in terms of sort of the toning and the colours within these, are there any specific things you've had to just be mindful of with paper choice or even pre-file preparation to get them exactly to how you want? As we discussed, there's compromises in the book, but we're talking about single image prints here.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. For example, black and white, I don't like glossy paper for black and white prints. That's me. I know there are plenty of black and white photographers out there who like a glossy paper. I find that the shine of the gloss just stops you sinking into the blacks. So I use a matte paper, and this is on NST bright white, as in fact is every single one of my black and white portfolio. And as you know, black and white is very important to me. So yes, definitely paper choice really matters. And I think it through quite hard. This picture is a slightly different sort of processing from the sirens that people might know of, because we evolve, don't we, as artists? And most of the sort of famous, if I can use that word, that sounds very big-headed, better known sirens, they're quite photographic in many ways. You know, I've controlled all the highlights and the shadows most of the time, and I've been very careful with them, and they're quite they're not perfect, but they're, you can see I'm striving to make sure everything's just right. Whereas now my style is definitely transitioning to something a bit rougher and more raw, and I'm quite enjoying that. So printing, I think, has helped me to get there. For example, I used to fret about noise. We've all been there. But if you print on a nice matte paper with a lovely soft natural texture like NST, noise just gets soaked up. And if anything, it just becomes part of the texture and adds to the lovely feeling and atmosphere of the picture. So I'm definitely changing. And this picture is deliberately a bit more raw than some of the sirens people will know about. And I'm happy with that. So that's where I'm heading. Whether people will buy it, I don't know, because it's new. No one's bought it yet. So we'll see.
Well, no better place to start. Tim, just as a final thought on this one before we move to the next image, I like to talk to you about that paper choice, because Rachel there mentioned about the texture, and I absolutely kind of agree pretty much with everything she was saying there, especially the black and white stuff. But there is such beautiful texture in the sea, especially in these types of images, in this type of weather, and this type of scenario. So what sorts of things should somebody look for? I know Rachel's outlined some of them, but in paper choice, when there is an image like this, which has that texture, but also that softness actually of the sky behind it is a different sort of texture, isn't it?
It is. And that's what kind of makes it a little bit tricky. I think Rachel could quite easily go down like the platinum etching route with this as well. But I think it's the sky, isn't it? That's quite a smooth texture. It's almost half and half, isn't it? In a way, you've kind of got the smoothness of the I want to say fog, but it's not fog, is it? The kind of the spray and things coming off, and then you've got this really loads of texture down here as well. But also you haven't. I was going to say you haven't really got a solid white, perhaps in the top of the lighthouse here and things like that. But I think the NST, I think Rachel's paper choices are perfect anyway for her work, as I've expressed before. But I think the NST is just kind of going to lift everything a little bit, and just because it's not a pure black, have you, Rachel? Really, apart from just in here as well, and it's just very delicate as well. The tone of the image as well, which I think just that little bit of a higher white point. And also, I think it could with a little too much texture, it could just overwhelm a little bit, perhaps.
I agree. I don't like a heavily textured paper where there are plain areas, because it just shows through. And if you've decided, if you've artistically chosen to have negative space in your picture, why would you then let the paper fill it with texture?
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't make sense. So in this picture, there's only one white thing, which is the light in the lighthouse. And that's deliberately the case. I didn't want a high contrast look. In fact, if I were to show you the histogram, there is a full range of tones, but they're not next to each other. That's how we perceive contrast. If you see black next to white, if I was to print out, and you know this, you guys, but if I was to print out a grayscale with 255 shades from white at one end to black at the other end going through, you would say that was a low contrast thing. You'd say it's just shades of grey, it's low contrast, even though it has actually got the full range of tones, because the black and the white aren't next to each other. It's funny, you know, there's a lot of myth about black and white, isn't there? It's got to have a full range of tones and be proper and punchy and all of that. No, it's a free artistic choice. And here I want the subtlety of the mood here. I don't want, I could have edited it to have really loads of black, but I didn't want to.
No, I don't. No. I think it's better for it as well. I think you can either go black and white, you kind of sit in the middle. Like you said, you want that punchy kind of, everyone says about that punchy kind of thing, but then you can go right to the other end and look at like the Japanese kind of street stuff where it's just literally black and white, no greys at all kind of thing. And then you kind of get somewhere. I think this is better for it. I think it's kind of, it just...
Yeah. As I age, and I am aging, as I age, I've become more interested in nuance and shades of grey, because I think you realise very little in life is black and white, really.
Yeah, well, there you go. And I think that also affects how you shoot as well, doesn't it? And what you look for next to each other, like you said, those contrasts. But I think let's move on to the next image, Tim, if we can. Yeah. Because I was really excited when I saw this in the selection. I was like, yes, let's do this one. Because it's right up my street, because it's quite abstract. But really, it's texture and its color and its shape and all those other things. So maybe actually, Rachel, just because this is a different type of image than a lot of people may have seen, maybe tell us a little bit about the background and really why you love these sorts of images, and whether you find those natural for you or whether you have to work a little harder at them. And then let's talk about the print, because there's a lot of stuff going on there with color and texture as well.
Yes, I didn't used to do any sort of detail work for a long time. I was, I liked big skies and big vistas. And then I was in the Lofoten Islands with a couple of very well-known photographers who I won't mention now, because I'm about to say something negative about one of them. And one of them was reviewing some pictures that we'd all taken. And he said, you're a big vista person, you can't do details. I tried to do a couple, and he said, no, you can't do them. That taught me a lot. First of all, it taught me never to say can't to a client, because, if it's someone, if you've gone on their workshop, you've gone because you respect them. And so you're going to take to heart what they say. And so I went away thinking exactly what he told me, or I obviously can't do that sort of thing, so I won't try. And then about a year later, I went on a workshop with someone I will mention, because he was very much a more nurturing person, called Jonathan Critchley, who I now work with at Ocean Capture. And we went to the West Fjords, where there's this abandoned herring factory with these most amazing walls. And Sam, you know about this because you asked me about this on the podcast once. I did all these pictures of the patterns on the walls because Jonathan told me to. Everyone else was doing wider shots, and he said, no, he said, you've got it into your head, Rachel, that you can't do this sort of thing. And I don't believe it. I think there's nothing you can't turn your hand to if you really try. Believe in yourself, and you can do nothing but walls for 2 hours. And I absolutely loved it. I loved it. And I came away aware that I could do abstracts, and it changed me as a photographer. And I owe that to Jonathan, who was a really good leader in that moment. And so since then, I have enjoyed just as much as making photos of big waves. I've enjoyed finding textures, patterns at the coast. And this is some rusty cladding on a seawall that I take clients to all the time now. And they love it because when you get up close, wow, I mean, it's nature's work of art, isn't it? The sea has corroded and rusted this metal and created these most amazing patterns. And this is one of a series I made there. And it's called perigee because I think there's something sort of vaguely astronomical about it all. And perigee is the word for I'm a bit of a sci-fi geek. Perigee is the word for a satellite's lowest point in its orbit. So I saw this sort of maybe an asteroid coming in to land. But lots of people have asked me if it's an aerial view of Mars, which is a funny question because I actually haven't been to Mars.
Come on, Rachel. Someone's got to do a workshop there one day.
Oh yeah, okay, I love that. That would be great.
We'll do one. Yeah.
But yes,
it looks like that drone shot, doesn't it? It's
yeah, and this one, I love platinum. You mentioned platinum etching, Tim.
Yes, yeah.
That's my paper for this one. I love printing this, and all of the pictures of this rust, they just sing on platinum etching. It's sort of a slightly grainier texture, and it just accentuates. It makes it feel three-dimensional.
I knew I've printed something on platinum etching for you, and I couldn't remember what it was.
Definitely that one.
That one. It was that one. I think it was. Yeah.
I think that idea of ambiguity of scale, Rachel, can be true of the larger, wider images as well. We've talked about the waves. How big are those waves? There's something you can play with. But I think when you're in these inner landscape or whatever you want to call them, kind of images, you can really extract that and extrapolate it even further to like you say, it does have a sort of intergalactic feel to me, something passing through the atmosphere. And I think a lot of that comes from the shapes, obviously, but the colors, that rust is gorgeous. But I wonder, just back on, I mean, when you told that story, that was quite fun because I thought, well, that's a red rag to a bull. Having done bits together, I love that attitude, which is great because everyone can do everything, right?
Yeah,
but absolutely. I wonder what people struggle with some of these, because I've had this with people before. Some people find it easier to lock in on these small things. And is there any advice you would give to people? Maybe is it closer, or you know what I'm saying? What would you help people with to get into it?
Yeah, not necessarily closer. I think there's a couple of compositional things that help. One is if it's just patterns. So if you imagine if we cut off the bottom quarter of that and just showed that, I think it would be a difficult picture because it would just be pattern without any lines or shapes. You need a little bit of geometry in the picture, I think, to help people find a way through it. So that, people may, especially if they're members of camera clubs, they may have occasionally heard judges say, oh, it's just wallpaper. I think that's obviously that's can be a bit too dismissive as a comment from a judge, but there might be a point underneath it all, which you just don't want a uniform pattern. You want something to lead the eye. And the other thing is also your point about getting closer, Sam. I will agree with that to an extent, because I think it can be good to allow the pattern to flow out beyond the edges of the frame. I think that often makes a more interesting picture than if you go wider and perhaps show, if it's a rock, for example, show the edges of the rock. That becomes a much more representational picture, and it's not abstract anymore because people know it's a rock. So photographers, we misuse the word abstract, something rotten. And
extract, perhaps more than abstract, isn't it?
Yes. So abstract, you shouldn't really know what the subject is. You should it's just about pattern. If you can tell it's what it is, it's really a detail or a close-up rather than an abstract. But I think these are abstract because people aren't sure. Some people guess it's rust. Lots of people have asked me if I made them in Yellowstone. So they think it's sort of geological stuff going on there. Anyway, it's all good fun.
No, it's all good fun. Exactly. Yeah. I'm glad we could talk about that. And so platinum etching on those detailed and this tonally would really suit that as well. Tim, do you want to jump us on to the next image if we can?
Yeah.
Because we let's just talk a little bit about black and white here, Rachel. I know we have a little bit, but black and white's really important to you. So this is a difficult question or a silly one. I can't quite decide. What makes a compelling black and white image for you?
Yeah, the same thing that makes a compelling color picture, frankly. It's emotion. And I know everyone gets annoyed when you say that because it sounds so nebulous and vague, doesn't it?
I can hang on to. Give me a button I can press.
I'm so sorry, I can't.
No.
But seriously, I think the reason why, I just gave a talk last night to Eastbourne Photographic Society. They were lovely. And I included a bit in it about black and white. And I said, which is absolutely true, if some horrible person said to me, right, for the rest of your life, you can't do both color and black and white. You've got to pick one and stick with it forever. I would pick black and white, which I think maybe surprises people. But I think it's because when you take away the color from a picture, you've absolutely signaled in the clearest way possible that you're not making a documentary record. Realism is no longer your goal. And your viewers come to the picture far more ready to view it as art rather than record. And I love that about black and white. So I'm not saying you can't make art in color. Of course you can. But I actually think it's harder. So I love black and white for that.
I think you're completely right there. I think, especially the black and white, like you said, it almost removes that from it. I think with photography, with the color element and things, they're almost then it's almost compared to painting too much, isn't it? I think, and it's kind of.
Yeah, I agree. And what people forget is that photography, unlike painting, is always going to have one foot in the realism camp.
Yes.
It can't help it. That's part of what photography is. You know, people use photography for very documentary reasons, like the dentist photographs your teeth, or the crime scene investigators rely on pictures from the crime scene. They're not going to rely on paintings, are they? So, you know, we've always got that to fight against. And I think it just goes when you present a picture in black and white.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. And I suppose what you mentioned earlier about your slightly looser approach now, if I can call it that, obviously not at the expense of quality or technical quality even, but how are you finding that looser approach manifests itself in terms of the end product?
Well, it may not be as commercial. So it's too soon to say, really. And we do have to bear that in mind. But I've been influenced by a number of photographers in this direction. I had years ago, I had a portfolio review with Joel Meyerowitz, who, if anyone knows of him, will be dead jealous now, because he's one of the greats. And it was arranged for me by the lovely Steve Watkins, much missed Steve from Outdoor Photography. And Joel said, well, you know, your work's lovely. It's bulletproof, really, which is nice to hear. And then he said, but if anything, it might be a bit too beautiful, which I went away and thought about. And I thought, yeah, he means it needs to be a bit more raw. And since then, I've found myself drawn more and more aesthetically to the work of photographers who actually break all the rules. I mean, one of my big faves at the moment is Ragnar Axelsson, as you know, Sam, because I've talked about him before. Oh, Ragnar, I mean, the horizon's like this. The highlights are funny. There's blocked shadows. There's noise everywhere. He's got people on the edge of the frame looking out. But those pictures are full of emotion. They are incredibly powerful. I don't believe anyone's going to look at Ragnar's pictures and worry about the technical. And that's where I want to go. I don't want to make pictures like Ragnar's. I want to make pictures like mine. But I want my work to take more risks, to be more free, to be raw. And if people don't like it, well, they can push off.
you heard it here first. No. I think that's really interesting. And like you said, it's packed full of atmosphere, isn't it? And you achieve that a different atmosphere in a lot of those very dramatic seascape images. And I think that's one of the big reasons why so many people connected with it. Yes, you could argue it was, I mean, not too pretty necessarily, but along those lines, technically absolutely proficient, blah, blah, blah. But I think some of that atmosphere you can find in different ways going forward. And that'll be really interesting to see, I think, for me to watch on your work. Let's just, Tim, keep us going on the next image just for time reasons, because we did want to talk about the fact that not everything has to be water. It might well be near water. But this, I think, for me, has some of the wonderful features of your work. And I would argue, again, this is probably much less commercial in a way. But there's some of those ambiguities, some of that menace, which I think is in some of your work, if I can say that. I mean it in a positive way. And how playing with those sorts of shadows and unseeables, should we say, you have to be not afraid of that, don't you, to really let things be dark and let those two things contrast, as we talked about earlier as well. Yeah.
Funnily enough, this picture is actually my favorite picture I made in all of 2018. And there's no sea in it at all. It is, however, taken at the bottom of a very big spring tide. And this is a little sea cave and rock that most people never see because it's usually underwater off the Oregon coast. But why I love it so much, actually, is because I love pictures where you see other things in the picture. And I've called this Faces. It used to be called Rock, and that was just not making it plain enough. So it's called Faces now, because if you're at all imaginative, and I think most photographers are, you will see faces in the dark rocks. And I think it depends, you interpret it according to where you are in your psyche. So for me, they're looking down quite paternalistically. But if you've had a rough lockdown, you might think that the little rock is entrapped and surveyed by all these faces. So that's cool. I really like it if people employ their imagination when they look at my pictures. So I do like pictures that have layers, metaphors, and ambiguity.
It's a difficult one to get, and I'm interested with you, Tim, as well, because we often, as the artists, see things like that or other things in our images, and how far do we go to signpost them? You mentioned there, calling it rock might not have been enough. You still seeing it, and others probably do. But I'm wondering, Tim, because you work in quite a conceptual photographic art world, what's the feeling with you about naming things like this and signposting some of those things, which are quite deep, meaningful things? A brief answer, if you can.
I've experimented with it. I've messed around with it. In my latest piece of work, I've put text in and taken text out and things like this. And I don't signpost at all. I understand why people do, and I'm not kind of criticizing that at all. For me, I would much rather someone looks at my work and be completely confused.
That's his goal. Confused.
It's the goal, but that lies in the intent of the work as well. So it's all linked. There's a reason for it. But yeah, I think I have signposted in the past. Don't get me wrong. I think for me, actually when Rachel said faces, I just thought, oh, it kind of just opened it up to another. Otherwise, you look at it as a picture of the rocks and things, and you think, oh, this is beautiful anyway. I mean, it doesn't need. But as soon as you put that little word as well, it kind of opens it up. You've almost got two avenues then, and it kind of just opens it up. And I think it's just, you can just see it, and
Well, Rachel, isn't one of the most powerful things about photography that it can tell these other stories? With the sirens, and I know you have huge history in that side of things in terms of your study of some of the mythology and things like that. So I think that's a really cool thing that photography can do, is connect those other stories. That's fair to say.
Yes, I mean, with titles, it's always a vexed subject. I work with 4 galleries now, and one of them hates my titles and would want me to call this Rock Study 1, and they want my title to always say where the picture's from, which is so not what my work's about. I really, this is not representing Oregon, this picture. But that's fine. I understand it. People react to their market, and they know what their market likes. So, that's fine. For me, titles are part of what makes me enjoy what I do. And in the end, that's the most important thing. I'm teaching creative development to my clients. The key thing is to keep the pleasure, keep the joy, or you just will become creatively contained. You just won't develop as an artist. And even though I am a professional and selling prints is my business, I mustn't let that direct the creativity, and it's a hard thing. You have to work on it every day. As you guys know, it's hard. You can easily end up letting the reception for your work drive it. And then you start to lose the magic. And I think you've just got to be brave and fight against that.
Very wise, Rachel. With that in mind, let's go to our last image. If we can, because again, this is another one I really love. I can't say that for all 5. It doesn't mean anything anymore, but I know what great joy, I suppose, can be had from exploring in these mini worlds. And it when you feel comfortable, if this is fair to say, Rachel, exploring in these places, it feels like there's just never-ending opportunity. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely right. I started doing this sort of work the portfolio has now got a name. It's called Ghost in the Shell. I started doing this work right back. I think the first picture I've got of that sort is from 2013, and I've been doing it a lot ever since. And I first started talking about it. I think you were there, Sam. I did a talk at Connected, which I think was in 2016 or 17, and talked about the frustrations of trying to do this sort of thing, especially when you try and photograph something like leaves or feathers, because the sea just takes them away every time. So annoying. And I've been doing it ever since. And yes, to answer your question, this is hugely enjoyable. The big vistas are fun, the gnarly waves are fun. I love it all. But this stuff is very, very zen. Overused word again, but it is. It's very contemplative. And I've really enjoyed just chilling out with this sort of thing when other people are on the same beach as me and they're all photographing the White Cliffs or something. And, occasionally someone comes up and says, "What on earth are you doing?" Pointing down. There's an amazing sunset happening over there. And I think to myself, yeah, but you're all going to take home the same picture of the cliffs with the sunset. And no one's noticed this little shell and that the light's just catching the edge of the wave as it curls around it. So I really enjoy this stuff. And in fact, I will come out here and say now that my Ghost in the Shell portfolio is the only other portfolio since Sirens that I felt really excited about.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. I think there's something transitory, isn't there, about being on a shoreline, and these moments come and go. And I'm really intrigued that because I feel a similar way. I can lose an hour where the world could be just imploding. I mean, it has. Let's be honest. I've lost a year with the world imploding. But where we're just looking down at something and it'll come and it'll go and it'll never be the same. The touch of the water, the touch of the light. And I think, yeah, like you said a moment ago as well, everyone should be enjoying their photography. If they're not, why are you doing it?
Yeah.
It's a question you have to ask yourself. So I'm really happy that you find different ways to enjoy it in that way. As a final point just on this, and we really appreciate your time, and just as we sort of come to a close here, we've covered loads of different things, which is great. Just from a print point of view on this one, have you experimented with this at slightly different sizes? We talked earlier about smaller and larger, and again, the paper choice on this one, is it another NST bright white?
No, it's not actually. I am on the horns of a dilemma with this one because I like it on two quite different papers. It's really nice on platinum etching.
Yeah.
Because, platinum etching has got quite a warm base. It's not a white base, unlike the NST bright white. And that suits this picture because even the foam has a warm tint because of the setting sun. It's a golden hour photograph. But I also really like it on Hahnemühle Fine Art Pearl. Which Tim said I was allowed to mention, even though it's not a Fotospeed paper.
No.
Available from Fotospeed.
Yeah,
yes,
available.
exactly.
We're a distributor.
Exactly. Yes. And I've got it on both. No one's ordered a print yet, so I haven't had to choose, but I will have to choose when someone does. But someone has just today ordered a 75 centimeter print of the newest picture from this Ghost in the Shell portfolio. And so I am going to have to decide whether that one is, again, it looks good on both of those papers. So watch this space.
Okay, well, you've got to let me know now. I'm intrigued. So.
I've got an inkling. I'm not going to tell you because I
oh, that doesn't work, Tim. That's cheating. You can't say that.
I don't know. For me, I don't know. Just a little bit towards the pearl. I don't know why.
I know why you say that because there's a slight shine on the water, isn't there?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't. It's not so much what I think. It's just the it's kind of the sand on the bottom right for me. I don't know why. I can't say. It just kind of I don't know. It's
Rachel, sorry. Just a final question, if I can, because I kind of know the answer, but I'm interested for you to share this with people. I know you print things and live with them, don't you? For a little bit, you have stuff up. So just very briefly, because we really are tight on time, how long does that take? Is it just something you can't put a time on? But from the point of capture to then printing at home to then potentially knowing what your final paper and big image print at the end is that a number of months? And how important is that to you as a process?
It does depend a bit. There's no one time, but it can be many days or weeks or months. And sometimes you just know. you've got a picture, you look at it. I would never look at it or upload it the next day. That's far too fast. But I might upload it the following week, and you just know that it's fine. They're usually the ones that require the least editing. And, I send it to print and pin it up. So in fact, I don't know if you can see, I don't know which way to move, because when I'm looking at this,
it's all the wrong way around.
It's all the wrong way around. Can you see there's 3 black and white pictures? They look identical because you can't see them close up. Now, I actually made that photograph there. I made that photograph a week ago, Monday, on the 29th of March. I was running a workshop, the first workshop we've been allowed because of rule of 6 and the beach, right? And I don't make photos when I'm leading, but I can get there really early and do something first. So I left the house at 4:45 a.m. and got down to the coast, and it was absolutely beautiful. And I just found a shell and photographed it. And I've got 3 edits. I've printed all 3 of them. They're pinned there, and they will be there until I choose which one I like best. And one day I'll walk into my study and I'll just know, but it might not be for ages. And until I do know, that's not going anywhere. That's as far as it will go. Print, I think the one thing I would say about print, having just been doing a print workshop with clients, I know print, you want to know that you're going to hit print and it's going to come off looking just like it did on the screen. And certainly if you learn to print properly, you can make that much more a viable outcome. But I wonder if that's just losing a little bit of the fun of this. Should we maybe just be willing to print a picture a few times and craft it? Because I think it's a way of getting back some of the craft that we used to have with the wet darkroom and printing. So I actually don't mind spending a little bit more money on ink and paper and having more than one version of a print and playing with it and experimenting. I don't want to just press the button and know it's just going to be like a machine just churning it out. I think it's actually just enjoy the whole print experience, try different papers, pin them up, stick them in a folder, get them out, touch them, and be willing to do a print again, do a print again and again until you get one that you love, and don't feel annoyed that you wasted some ink and some paper, because it's still way cheaper than buying a new camera, and it'll make a much bigger difference to your photography than buying that new camera.
Oh, definitely. No, I think that's the way I tell people to print is think of yourself almost in the dark room, especially if you're old enough to remember the dark room as well. It's you think in that terms. If you think in that way, I think you enjoy it so much more as well.
Absolutely right.
It comes out of the printer and it surprises you, doesn't it? It's a surprise sometimes. Well, most of the time, to be honest.
In a good way. No.
Well, in a good, definitely in a good way.
No.
It can be in a bad time.
There's probably another conversation for another day there about how we might print things differently as we go on. Because, if we look back at Ansel Adams' prints, or anyone, I just use him because it's a great example. They vary quite a lot over a number of years of how he interpreted the print. And so it's that idea of the print is its own thing. There's a screen version which is on the website and may or may not change, and equally could, but the print is its own thing and has its own life and may modulate as well. But maybe we'll come back to that another time, because we've taken up far too much of Rachel's time already. But it's always fascinating to chat, and we all appreciate the time you've given us, Rachel, and it's great for us to catch up with you and see some of your new work and talk about what's going forward with that. So we really appreciate that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
And Tim, always great to get your tech advice and from a different point of view from his photography background in the conceptual side of things. So thank you for watching, everybody. We'll be back again soon with another Fotospeed Artist Talk. But for now, it's goodbye from all of us. Cheerio for now.
Bye. Bye-bye.